The year was 1887, and the dust of a long, unforgiving summer had settled into the very bones of Amos Hale's farm. It was a fine, choking powder that coated the thirsty corn, lay in a film over the water in the troughs, and etched new lines of grief around his eyes. The land itself felt weary, a vast cracked canvas of browns and faded golds, stretching out to a horizon that promised only more of the same. Amos, at 68 years old, felt a kinship with the exhausted earth. Every morning, the protest of his joints was a grim echo of the groaning timbers in his barn. He moved through his chores with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who had been winding down for a very long time. His stasis was a thing of profound silence. The farmhouse, once filled with the warm bustle of his wife, Martha, and the boisterous energy of their son, was now a hollow vessel. Memories clung to the air like wood smoke, faint but persistent. He still saw Martha by the stove, her hands dusted with flour, a gentle smile playing on her lips. He heard the phantom echo of his boy, Thomas, chasing chickens in the yard, his laughter a bright, piercing sound that time had failed to completely erase. But they were ghosts, and Amos was their solitary keeper. Diphtheria had taken them both in the same cruel winter a decade past, and in their wake it had left a silence so complete that some days Amos thought he could hear his own heart breaking over and over again. His life had become a simple, brutal equation of survival. He rose with the sun, tended to his meager livestock, patched the endless decay of his property, and fell into his cold bed at dusk. He was a creature of habit, not because he found comfort in it, but because it was the only thing that stood between him and the suffocating weight of his loneliness. The nearby town of Redemption Creek offered no solace. It was a place of hard-faced men and women who measured a man's worth by the sweat on his brow and the straightness of his fences. They saw Amos as a relic, a stubborn old farmer clinging to a failing patch of dirt. They offered him pity, which felt more like judgment, and kept their distance. He was as isolated among them as he was in the middle of his own empty fields. The only living thing on the farm that seemed to possess any real fire was Behemoth, his bull. The animal was a cantankerous brute of muscle and ill temper, a remnant of a time when Amos had harbored ambitions of building a proper herd. Now, the bull was mostly a liability, his aggression a constant, simmering threat contained by aging fences that Amos could barely keep mended. The animal was a reflection of all the untamed, bitter things in the world, a force of nature that demanded respect and, more often than not, fear. It was on a blistering August afternoon that the world's silence was shattered. Amos was out by the south pasture, wrestling with a rotted fence post. His back ached with a familiar, deep-seated fire, and the sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes. He was hammering a new rail into place when a flicker of movement at the edge of his property caught his eye. An old man, his back straight despite his years, was walking along the faint trace of a path that cut across the corner of Amos's land. He was Lakota, his long grey braids bound with leather, his face a beautiful, intricate map of a long life lived under the sun and sky. Amos knew the path. It was an old one, used by the Lakota long before any survey lines had been drawn or deeds filed. Most folks in Redemption Creek would have run the man off, seeing his presence as a trespass. Amos, however, felt a strange lack of malice. He was just a man, walking. There was a quiet dignity in his stride that Amos, in his own shambling existence, could not help but respect. He watched for a moment, then turned back to his work, the rhythmic thud of his hammer, the only sound in the oppressive heat. Then another sound broke the stillness, a sharp crack, followed by a low, guttural roar. Amos's head snapped up. Behemoth. The bull had finally done it, splintering the very rail Amos had been about to replace. The animal stood for a moment, its massive head lowered, steam snorting from its nostrils. Its small, dark eyes fixed on the figure of the Lakota elder, an easy, solitary target in the open field. Time seemed to slow, stretching into a thick, syrupy dread. Amos saw the bull paw the dry earth, bunching its powerful haunches. He saw the elder turn, his calm expression shifting to one of weary understanding. There was nowhere to run. Something inside Amos Hale, something dormant for 10 long years, broke free. It was not a thought. It was an instinct, pure and absolute. He dropped the hammer and vaulted the fence with an agility that defied his age. He ran, his worn boots pounding against the parched ground, his lungs burning. He didn't have a plan. He had only a single blazing imperative. That old man would not die on his land. "Run!" Amos screamed, his voice a raw, cracking thing. "Get behind the rocks." The bull charged. It was a terrifying spectacle of focused power, a ton of fury thundering across the field. Amos reached the elder just as the beast closed the distance. He didn't hesitate. He shoved the old man hard, sending him stumbling towards a cluster of granite boulders, and then he turned, bracing himself, his arms outstretched as if he could somehow hold back a force of nature. The impact was catastrophic. The bull's massive head struck him in the chest, lifting him from his feet and throwing him backward. He heard a sickening crack, a sound like dry branches snapping, and felt a white-hot, searing pain explode through his side. The world dissolved into a dizzying swirl of dust and sky. He landed hard, the air driven from his lungs in a ragged gasp. Through a haze of agony, he saw the bull skidding to a halt, turning to charge again. This was it, he thought with a strange, detached clarity. This was the end of his long, quiet decline. But the second charge never came. The Lakota elder had not run. He had retrieved his walking stick and was now moving with a surprising swiftness, circling the infuriated animal. He made a low, whistling sound, a strange, bird-like call, and waved his stick, drawing the bull's attention away from the fallen farmer. The beast, confused by this new, defiant figure, bellowed and turned. Its focus shifted. The elder, with the grace of a dancer, led the animal on a wide, arcing path away from Amos, using his knowledge of the creature's own momentum against it, until it was far enough away to no longer be an immediate threat. Only then did the old man return. He knelt beside Amos, his dark, knowing eyes assessing the damage. Amos tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, dissolving into a pained wheeze. Every breath was a fresh torment, a knife twisting in his side. The elder gently placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance. He spoke a few words in a language Amos didn't understand, his voice calm and melodic. Then he stood and disappeared into the tall grass near the creek bed. Amos lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, the pain, a relentless tide. He felt a profound sense of failure. He hadn't even managed to die properly. He had only managed to get himself broken in front of a stranger. When the elder returned, his hands were full of leaves and roots. He crushed them between 2 stones, creating a damp, fragrant poultice that he carefully applied to Amos's chest. The cool paste offered a small, blessed relief from the burning agony. The elder looked at him again, then at the distant farmhouse, and seemed to make a decision. With another soft-spoken word, he turned and began walking, not toward the town but east, into the rolling hills from where he had come. Amos, alone again, closed his eyes and surrendered to the encroaching darkness. He awoke to the sound of hoofbeats, not the single plodding rhythm of a lone horse, but the powerful, synchronized drumming of many. He pried his eyes open, his vision blurry. 7 figures on horseback were silhouetted against the blood-red sunset. They were Lakota, their long hair flowing in the evening breeze, their faces stoic and unreadable. They dismounted in a fluid, unified motion, their presence an overwhelming force in the quiet landscape. For a terrifying moment, the ingrained prejudices of Redemption Creek surged within him. He was helpless, broken, and surrounded. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of his pain. The men approached, their moccasins making no sound on the dry ground. The elder, Tashunka, was with them, pointing toward Amos. The man who appeared to be the eldest son, a tall, powerfully built man with eyes as dark and keen as a hawk's, knelt beside him. His movements were precise, economical. He and another man, his brother, slid their hands beneath Amos's back and legs. Their touch was surprisingly gentle, yet firm as iron. "We will take you to your house," the man said. His English was clear, accented but perfectly understandable. Amos tried to protest, to say he was fine, to tell them to leave him be, but the slightest movement sent a fresh wave of agony through him. He could only manage a strangled groan. They lifted him as if he weighed nothing, creating a makeshift stretcher with their own powerful arms, and carried him across the field. The world swayed sickeningly around him. He was aware of the other sons fanning out, one retrieving his hammer, another heading toward the broken fence, already beginning the work. As they carried him through the door of his own home and gently laid him on his bed, Amos Hale realized his quiet, solitary life was over. He just didn't know if he had been rescued or captured. The days that followed blurred into a strange, pain-filled dream. The 7 sons of Tashunka moved into his barn, their presence transforming the derelict space into a functioning camp. They did not ask for permission, they simply existed, a quiet, efficient force that had taken over the rhythm of the farm. The eldest son, Chaitan, became Amos's reluctant caretaker. He would appear in the doorway of the bedroom each morning with a bowl of thin broth and a cup of bitter, healing tea made from herbs Amos had never seen before. Their initial interactions were steeped in a profound and watchful silence. Amos, trapped in his bed, could only observe. He was suspicious, his mind a cauldron of questions and ingrained fear. Why were they here? What did they want? Every kindness felt like a precursor to a debt he could not possibly pay. He watched Chaitan move through his house, noting the respectful way he avoided Martha's rocking chair, the careful manner in which he handled the worn tin plates. There was no menace in him, only a deep, abiding seriousness. "You must rest," Chaitan would say, his voice a low rumble. "The ribs are broken, 3 of them. My father says the healing will be slow." "Why are you here?" Amos finally managed to ask one afternoon, his voice a dry rasp. Chaitan paused in the act of changing the poultice on Amos's chest. He looked at the old farmer, his gaze direct and unflinching. "My father, Tashunka, was in danger. You placed yourself between him and the bull. You took the blow that was meant for him. This is a debt of life. It cannot be ignored." "It was nothing," Amos grumbled, trying to shift in the bed and regretting it instantly as fire shot through his side. "Just a stupid old man and a stupid bull. You can go. I'll be fine." "You will not be fine," Chaitan stated, not as a rebuke, but as a simple fact. "You cannot work. Your fields will die. Your animals will starve. We will not let the man who saved our father perish from his own good deed. We will work your land. We will stay." And stay they did. From his window, Amos had a clear view of the yard and the fields beyond, and he became a spectator to the resurrection of his own farm. The sons worked with a synergy that was both beautiful and heartbreaking to watch. It reminded him so acutely of the way he and Thomas used to work together, an unspoken understanding passing between them. He watched them repair the fence around the bull's pasture, not with a patch, but with new, solid posts and thick rails, their axes rising and falling in perfect unison. He saw 2 of them climb onto the roof of the barn, methodically replacing the rotted shingles that had been leaking for years. Another son, Kangi, who had a gentle way with animals, took over the care of his livestock. The milk cow, which had been growing thin, began to look healthier. The chickens were penned in a newly fortified coop, safe from coyotes. They moved with purpose, wasting no motion, speaking little, their actions a language far more powerful than words. Tashunka visited every day. The elder would sit in a simple straight-backed chair by Amos's bed. He did not speak English, and Amos did not speak Lakota, but they communicated nonetheless. Tashunka would examine Amos's ribs with practiced hands, his touch gentle. He would nod, a gesture of approval at the slow progress of healing, and then they would simply sit in a shared silence that was, surprisingly, not uncomfortable. It was a silence of mutual respect, of an understanding that transcended language. In those quiet moments, Amos began to feel the hard shell of his loneliness begin to crack. One evening, a faint, tinny melody drifted into the room. It was a tune he hadn't heard in a decade, a simple, sweet lullaby. Amos pushed himself up on his elbows, ignoring the sharp protest from his ribs. In the main room, one of the younger sons, a boy named Wapasha with clever hands, was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of him was Martha's old music box. The hinge had been broken for years, the delicate inner workings silenced. Wapasha had taken it apart and, with a small knife and immense patience, had whittled a new gear from a piece of hardwood. He turned the key, and the fragile music filled the house once more. The sound undid him. A great, shuddering sob escaped Amos's lips, a raw, painful sound pulled up from the deepest well of his grief. It was the first time he had truly wept since the funeral. Chaitan appeared in the doorway instantly, his expression alarmed. He saw Amos, shaking, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, and his hard face softened with a flicker of understanding. He said something sharp in Lakota to his younger brother, who looked up, startled, his face falling as he realized the consequence of his actions. He quickly closed the music box, silencing the tune. "No," Amos choked out. "Let it play." Chaitan hesitated, then nodded to his brother. The music began again, a ghost of a melody in the dim light. Chaitan walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, a silent, solid presence. "It was my wife's," Amos said, his voice thick. "She loved that song. My boy, Thomas, he would fall asleep to it." He didn't know why he was telling him this. The words just came, spilling out like water from a breached dam. He spoke of Martha's kindness, of Thomas's bright spirit, of the crushing silence that had followed their passing. Chaitan listened without interruption. When Amos finally fell silent, his grief spent, Chaitan spoke, his voice low and steady. "We also know loss. The bluecoats took my grandfather. The spotted sickness took my sister. To live is to lose, but to live is also to remember. The song does not bring back the dead, it brings back the love they gave. That is a thing of strength." In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. Amos no longer saw a captor or a stranger. He saw a man who understood the geography of sorrow. He saw a man who, despite his formidable appearance, possessed a core of profound wisdom and empathy. The fear that had lingered in the corners of his heart finally dissolved, replaced by a fragile, tentative shoot of trust. The music played on, no longer a song of grief, but a hymn to memory, weaving a new, unexpected thread of connection between two disparate worlds. It was only a matter of time before the world outside the farm took notice. News traveled slowly to a place like Redemption Creek, but it traveled surely, carried on the tongues of gossip and suspicion. The sight of 7 Lakota men working the Hale farm was a thing too strange to go unremarked. It started as whispers in the general store, then grew to murmurs in the saloon, and finally hardened into outright hostility. Sheriff Callahan was a man who preferred a quiet life. He was not inherently malicious, but he was a creature of his environment, and his environment was one of deep-seated prejudice. He had heard the stories, that the Indians had taken over the old man's land, that Amos was being held against his will, that it was the start of some new trouble. He had dismissed them at first, but as the pressure from the town's more prominent citizens, like the banker Mr. Weston, mounted, he knew he had to act. One morning, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced their arrival. Sheriff Callahan rode at the head of a small, grim-faced posse of 4 men, Mr. Weston beside him, his face a mask of smug self-righteousness. They reined in their horses at the edge of the yard, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and aggression. Chaitan and his brothers stopped their work, gathering together in a silent, formidable line near the barn. They were unarmed, but their stillness, their unity, was more imposing than any weapon. Tashunka emerged from the barn, his gaze calm and steady as he watched the newcomers. "That's far enough, Callahan," Chayton called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "This is private property." "This is Amos Hale's property," the sheriff retorted, swinging down from his horse. "And we've come to see to his welfare. We've had reports he's being held here." "He is not being held," Chayton said, his voice dangerously low. "He is being cared for." Mr. Weston scoffed loudly. "Cared for? Looks to me like you've taken over, squatting on a white man's land. We know your kind." The air crackled with tension. The other brothers tensed, their hands balling into fists. Chayton held up a hand, a subtle gesture that kept them in check. It was at that moment that the farmhouse door opened. Amos stood there, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick Wapasha had made for him. He was pale and gaunt, and his breath came in shallow, painful bursts, but his eyes burned with a fire that had been absent for a decade. He had overheard the commotion and, with a monumental effort, had pulled himself from his bed. Chayton was at his side in an instant, a steadying arm supporting his weight. The sight of the old farmer leaning on the Lakota man seemed only to confirm the townsman's worst suspicions. "Amos, thank God," Sheriff Callahan said, taking a step forward. "Are you all right? Don't you worry. We'll get these gentlemen off your property." "You'll do no such thing," Amos said, his voice surprisingly strong, though it cost him dearly. Each word was punctuated by a sharp pain in his chest. "These men are here at my invitation." Weston let out a harsh laugh. "Your invitation? Amos, be sensible. Look at you. They've clearly taken advantage of your age. They're holding you hostage in your own home." "The only thing I'm a hostage to is my own broken body," Amos snapped back, his anger giving him a surge of strength. He took a painful step forward, standing more fully on his own, though Chayton's hand remained lightly on his back, ready to catch him. "And I broke it saving that man there," he said, nodding toward Tashunka, "from my own bull, an animal that would have killed him." He recounted the story in short, sharp sentences, his breath catching with the effort. He told them how Tashunka had saved his life in turn, how his sons had carried him home and tended to his wounds. He spoke of the work they had done, pointing a trembling finger at the mended barn roof, the solid fence line, the well-tended fields. "They have shown me more decency and honor in 2 weeks than I've seen from this town in 10 years. Amos declared, his gaze sweeping over the posse. "They are repaying a debt, a concept some of you might not understand." Tashunka stepped forward and spoke at length in his own tongue, his voice resonant with authority and dignity. Though the white men could not understand the words, the meaning was clear in his gestures and his powerful presence. Chayton translated, his voice ringing with pride. "My father says that honor is the spine of a man. Your friend there," he said, fixing Mr. Weston with a withering stare, "has no spine. You saved my father's life. Therefore, your life is now our concern. Your farm is our concern. We will not leave until the debt is paid, and a debt of life, it is never fully paid." The sheriff was taken aback. This was not the simple scenario he had envisioned. Amos was lucid, defiant, and clearly protective of the very people he was supposed to be a victim of. The posse shifted uncomfortably, their certainty beginning to waver in the face of the old farmer's fierce conviction. "Now this is still my land," Amos said, his voice dropping to a near whisper as his energy faded. He leaned more heavily on Chayton. "And I am telling you, Sheriff, to take your men and get off it. These men are my guests. They are family." The word hung in the air, a shocking, radical declaration. Family. It was a line drawn in the dust, a clear choice made. Amos had chosen the outsiders, the ones his community scorned, over the community itself. He had chosen kindness over prejudice, honor over suspicion. Sheriff Callahan looked from Amos's determined, pain-filled face to Chayton's unyielding stare, and then to the silent, watchful brothers. He saw no crime being committed. He saw a complicated situation that he had no legal or moral right to interfere with. He was a man of the law, and the law in this instance was on the side of the old farmer. He sighed, a long, weary sound of defeat. "All right, Amos, if that's how you want it." He turned to his men. "Mount up. There's nothing for us to do here." Mr. Weston sputtered in protest. "Sheriff, you can't be serious. You're just going to leave him with them." "He's a free man on his own property," Callahan said, his tone final. "He's made his choice. Let's go." As the posse retreated in a cloud of dust and indignation, Amos finally allowed his body to sag, his strength completely gone. Chaitan and Kangi supported him, guiding him back into the house and to his bed. As he lay back, exhaustion washing over him, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had faced down his own community, his own past, and had spoken a truth that had been silent within him for too long. The confrontation was over, and in its wake, something new and solid had been forged. The temporary arrangement of debt and honor had been tempered into a bond, unbreakable and true. In the weeks and months that followed, the farm transformed. Under the tireless, skilled hands of Tashunka's sons, the land that had been slowly succumbing to decay began to breathe again. The corn grew tall and strong, the fields were cleared of stones, and the barn, once a collapsing skeleton, stood solid and proud against the skyline. The work was hard, but it was shared, and the burden, divided by 8 men, became light. Amos healed, slowly but steadily. The fire in his ribs subsided to a dull ache, a constant reminder of the day his life had irrevocably changed. As his strength returned, he joined the work, not with the frantic desperation of a man alone, but with the steady pace of one who is part of a whole. He taught the younger sons the nuances of crop rotation that his own father had taught him, the secrets of the soil he had cultivated for 50 years. In return, they taught him their own ways. Tashunka showed him how to read the clouds, how to predict the weather not with an almanac, but with the behavior of the birds and the insects. Chaitan taught him which wild plants were medicine and which were food, knowledge passed down through countless generations. The silence of the farm was replaced by a new symphony of sounds. The rhythmic thump of axes, the low murmur of conversation in both English and Lakota, the soft whinny of horses, and sometimes, in the quiet of the evenings, the sound of a drum and a single, haunting voice raised in song. Amos would sit on his newly repaired porch, a cup of Chaitan's herbal tea in his hands, and listen. It was a sound of life, of community, of belonging. The town of Redemption Creek kept its distance. Some saw Amos as a traitor, others as a fool, but they left him alone. The farm became an island, a world unto itself, governed by its own laws of honor and mutual respect. Occasionally, a child from the town, braver or more curious than their parents, would creep to the edge of the property and watch the strange, blended family at work, a sight that defied all their preconceived notions. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in hues of orange and purple, Amos sat on the porch with Tashunka. The harvest was in, the bounty stored in the repaired barn. It was the most successful harvest the farm had seen in 15 years. The 7 brothers were finishing their evening meal by the fire they had built near the barn, their quiet laughter carrying on the cool air. Amos looked at the old Lakota man beside him. "Tashunka," he said, the name feeling comfortable on his tongue. "The debt, it's been paid. More than paid. You and your sons, you are free to go. Your home is waiting." Tashunka was silent for a long moment, watching his sons. He then turned his gaze to Amos, a gentle, knowing smile touching his lips. He spoke in his language, his voice soft but firm. As if on cue, Chaitan approached, having overheard the exchange. "My father says a man's home is not the soil he was born on, but the place where his spirit can rest," Chaitan translated, his eyes meeting Amos's. "He says this farm was dying because it had a body but no spirit. Our family had a spirit, but no body, no land to call our own since the treaty lines were redrawn. Here, the two have come together. Amos felt a lump form in his throat. He looked out at the fields, at the solid barn, at the men who had become the pillars of his world. He thought of the hollow years, the crushing weight of his grief and loneliness. He realized that Behemoth's charge had not been an ending. It had been a violent, painful, and beautiful beginning. The bull had broken his ribs, but it had also broken open his heart, letting the world back in. "This is your home now," Amos said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you, for as long as you will have it." Chaitan placed a hand on Amos's shoulder, a gesture of profound solidarity. "A debt of life," he said quietly, "is not work, it is a bond. We are not your workers, Amos Hale. We are your sons, and this is our home." From inside the house, the faint, tinny melody of Martha's music box began to play. Wapasha had taken to winding it each evening, a small ritual that had become the farm's vespers. The tune, once a painful reminder of all that was lost, now felt like a promise of all that had been found. Amos Hale leaned back in his chair, the ache in his side a gentle throb, and watched the stars begin to emerge in the vast, darkening sky. He was not alone. He was home.